National Novel Writing Month is all about writing on the fly, and writing on the fly can be intimidating because it might seem impossible to know where you're headed. But there are patterns that you can watch for, patterns that crop up organically in writing, and even if you never intended them to be there. Because they're in your head, they're in every writer's head. And how do I know this? Because these patterns crop up in tons of stories, even before they were recognized as patterns. And you can recognize these patterns on the fly and use them to strengthen the narrative power of your story. The key is archetypes. Now, I know archetypes are kind of a cliche. You don't even have to like the term archetypes. You can call them tropes, patterns, threads, models, whatever you like. But no matter what you call them or why they do exist, and they have undeniable storytelling power. Now, I want to warn you, there are some spoiler alerts in this if you haven't watched the original Star Wars trilogy or the first three Pirates of the Caribbean movies or the Lord of the Rings trilogy, because I draw a lot of my examples from these three sets of movies. They're great examples of archetypal energy, but I hope you look beyond those three to see the same pattern in movies and books that you love. We usually think about archetypes as informing character relationships, like how the hero character learns things from the guru or the mentor character. But there are also scene archetypes that can carry you through an entire stretch of writing once you realize you're in one of those scenes. For example, the philosophical banter scene, where the rough character, which is your Han Solo or your Boromir, is having an argument with the guru, Obi-Wan or your Gandalf, about the best way to live. Now remember how at the Council of Elrond, in the first Lord of the Rings movie, Gandalf was adamant that the ring had to be taken into Mordor and destroyed. But then what did Boromir say? We all know.
One does not simply walk into Mordor.
And that's because he had a cynical, rough perspective. That's what the rough character is. And remember on the Millennium Falcon in episode 4, when Obi-Wan was trying to teach Luke about the Force, and Han Solo interrupted by saying,
"Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid."
More cynical rough talk as a counterpart to the, let's say, intellectual and high-minded guru perspective. Now these two characters, the rough and the guru, they're both usually older than the hero, and they've had experiences that the hero hasn't had. So letting them argue where the hero can overhear them can really amp up the tension between the characters and give your story some depth, and give the reader some insight into what your story is actually about. They provide you with a scene, usually soon after the rough appears in the story, and if you think about archetypes, you'll already know how to write that scene. And that's a good 5,000 words under your NaNoWriMo belt right there. What's the daily word count for NaNoWriMo? It's like a 1,600 something, 1,660 something. But that's so 3 days worth of writing that you can just barrel through once you recognize that you're in the philosophical banter scene. And there are plenty of these archetypal scenes. Another good one is the stuck place with water. Think about the trash compactor in Star Wars, or the door to Moria in Fellowship of the Ring, or that final scene in the treasure cave in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. The plot is brought to a halt by some obstacle. For example, the trash compactor door that Han Solo can't shoot through, or the magical dwarven door that Gandalf can't open, or the immortal impasse between Jack, who's the rough in those movies, and Barbossa, because during that scene they're both undead, so they can't kill each other. So they're stuck. There's usually an underwater monster in that scene, probably representing the anxiety that's rising up when we're in a stuck place. In Star Wars, it's that weird monster that drags Luke under. And in Fellowship of the Ring, it's the beast that's in that pool outside of Moria. In the Pirates movies, it's actually the undead crew of the Black Pearl who, if you remember, are going underwater out to the ships that are waiting outside. Now go back and watch those scenes. Note their similarities, note their differences. Sometimes the characters are stuck inside, sometimes the characters are stuck outside. So you can learn all these patterns and all these different things you can play with. In each stuck place with water scene, the hero provides a solution that either the rough or the guru couldn't manage. It's Luke that gets 3PO and R2 to open those trash compactor doors that rough Han Solo couldn't shoot through, even though he had a good blaster at his side. Frodo solves the riddle at the door to Moria that Gandalf couldn't solve. And in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, that undead impasse between Jack and Barbossa, it's Will Turner who fixes that by breaking the curse. And then, of course, Jack is able to kill Barbossa. Notice how the details of these scenes are different based on the characters, the setting, the genre, even though they have a lot of similarities. In Fellowship, the stuck place happens right after the philosophical banter scene. And in Star Wars, it's quite a bit later. In Pirates, it's actually the climax where they're fighting the big boss. So if you want to use stuck place archetype to guide your writing, you can use it wherever it fits in your story. You don't have to feel constrained to put it in this place or this place. It's like when you're writing and you suddenly go, oh, we're in the stuck place scene. Then you've got another 5,000 words or so, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, that you can just brush through because you know what scene you're in, you know what the characters are supposed to do, and what sort of things, sort of emotional energy is going to be in that scene. So now remember that using these archetypal scenes isn't like you're copying, because you're writing your own story, and these scenes are in really too many stories to count. I mean, they've been around for ages. So now that you know about them, you'll probably start seeing them everywhere, so you'll realize how they're all over the place, particularly the philosophical banter scene. So you're not copying, you're echoing, you're rhyming with them. These archetypal scenes already literally crop up in thousands of tales, and if you read enough novels and watch enough films, you'll see them over and over again, and you'll learn from them better now that you know how to recognize them. And then you can decide for yourself, for example, whether it's the rough or the guru who both can't solve the puzzle in the stuck place, or maybe both of them. You can decide for yourself if the hero solves the puzzle all on their own, or if they get a little help from the companions, or like Luke did, or like Will Turner did from Elizabeth Swann. You can decide for yourself what the nature of the water is, what role the monster plays, where in your story the scene takes place, and what effect escaping the stuck place has on your character's quest. But the archetypes are there to give you a framework in which to make those decisions. And when you're writing on the fly, having a framework is a very powerful thing. Now, also as you're writing on the fly, try to keep your mind open to the archetypes that the characters fit into. I'm pretty sure you have a good idea who your hero is going to be pretty soon in the story. But the hero is himself or herself or itself, defined by being at the center of a network of relationships to the other characters. In fact, it's the relationship to the hero that defines the other characters. So let me go briefly into the basic archetypal relationships of the main characters. And when you're looking for the hero, you might be tempted to get distracted by a character whose vibrant energy makes him or her a fan favorite, or you a favorite to write. They're just fun to write. Like think of Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, or Jack Sparrow in the Pirates movies. But this is a distraction. The hero is not the most interesting character necessarily, but they're the character with a journey. The character that we move through the story with, identifying with, and struggling with. It's Leonard in the Big Bang Theory. It's Will Turner in the first three Pirates movies, and it's Luke Skywalker. It's Frodo. And it's the hero's relationship to the other characters that determines who is the companion, who is the rough, who is the guru, and who is the villain. So the hero is about relationships to others, whether friendly or not. This is true whether you're writing a first-person narrative, which is my personal favorite, or a third-person story. The hero draws on and reacts to the personalities of the other characters. Now, next up, let's talk about the rough, who is often confused with the companion character. But while the rough is usually older than the hero, the companion is usually younger and somehow more loyally supportive to the hero. Think about Samwise Gamgee's relationship to Frodo, or R2's relationship to Luke, or Elizabeth Swann's relationship to Will Turner. And very often, the companion's supportive involvement with the hero and the hero's archetypal energy leads them to later in the story become heroes in their own right. Like, for example, we saw this with Samwise and Elizabeth over the course of their trilogies. But while the primary role of the companion is to stick by the hero no matter what, the rough sticks by when it's convenient and still maintains a bit of antagonism and some distance. Now, some of this is conveyed by the differing wisdom that the rough and the guru give to the hero, but the rough can also draw in a little bit of energy of the villain, and he can come off as kind of a quasi-villain sometimes. Think about how Han Solo abandons Luke at Yavin right at the moment they're getting ready to raid the Death Star, when they need him the most. Or think about how the corrupted rough Boromir tries to steal the ring from Frodo because near the climax, because he's just being drawn in by the villainous energy. Or think about how Jack Sparrow always seems to be on the verge of betraying Will Turner to the bad guys in those movies. Now, there's an archetypal set of scenes in the rough-hero relationship that I like to call the goodbye hello scenes. Now, Han Solo does abandon Luke at Yavin, but then what happens? He shows up in the nick of time during the big battle to save Luke's hide. Boromir tries to steal the ring, but then later sacrifices himself, protecting the hobbits from the orcs. And good old Jack Sparrow, of course, eventually shows his true colors by defeating Barbossa after Will Turner gets him out of the stuck place. And remember, here's a good one. Remember how Maui abandoned Moana only to swoop back in during their final battle? I'm telling you, these archetypal scenes are everywhere. You'll see them everywhere now that you know how to look for them. So roughs are ambiguous characters, good guys, but also kind of bad guys, and this makes them intriguing. And so often, as like with Jack Sparrow, we can mistake them for the hero, but the rough energy is a sort of supportive energy, not the main energy of the hero. Which brings us to the guru. Often called the mentor, or sometimes kind of lamely, people will call him the helper. The guru is an elder guide who teaches the hero and us about how the world works and what the main theme is and what the main evil is like. This is obviously Gandalf and Obi-Wan, so I won't dig deeper into them. But in the Pirates movie, we have a guru who is also the villain, the first Pirates movie. It's Barbossa. Barbossa's relationship to Will Turner is at first completely mediated through Jack Sparrow and Elizabeth Swann, the rough and the companion. And he teaches each of those, you'll see conversations that he has where he teaches each of those and teaches us who are watching the movie about the consequences of greed, which is the ultimate villain in the first three pirate movies. Barbossa plays the role of proximate villain. He's the Darth Vader who channels energy from the Emperor, and and who is the ultimate bad guy in Star Wars, whereas greed is the ultimate bad guy in the Pirates movies. Or he's like Boromir who feels the lure of the ring. There's this relationship between the ultimate bad guy and the proximate bad guy. But since Barbossa is also a tragic figure, he's able to teach the main characters about the consequences of greed, even as he is driven to evil acts by those consequences. It's a good blending of two different archetypes in one character. Now, getting back to archetypal scenes, the guru often has a pattern similar to the rough's goodbye hello moments. Very often at some point, the guru dies, forcing the hero to go it alone for a while. But then, guess what? He comes back somehow. In Lord of the Rings, you remember Gandalf the Grey falls into the pit of Khazad-dûm, and there's more water there for some reason, only to come back as Gandalf the White, as he stole those colors from the villain Saruman. In Star Wars, Obi-Wan dies, only to return as a disembodied voice. And then Yoda picks up the guru energy in the second movie, and then what does he do? He dies. It's like gurus die. They're dying all over the place. But then Yoda also comes back in his his Force spirit persona. So Star Wars fans are going to get me on that. I know that's not the right term. So in the original Pirates trilogy, Barbossa is both the guru and the villain, and his death is both the hero's victory and the guru's fall scene. So you got not only archetypes can blend, but when the archetypes blend, their archetypal scenes tend to blend. And he comes back later as a full-fledged guru in the third movie. And we'll get more into the fun juggling of archetypal energy later. So let's move on to the companion, because we've already discussed the companion a little bit in just sort of pulling them apart from the rough. In a lot of stories, the companion is connected to a comic pair, which is two characters who add comic relief to the story. And you probably, the moment I say that, you're probably going to think, oh, I know a couple of those. The companion can actually be part of this comic pair, like R2 is part of it in his comic pair with C-3PO, but he's also himself actually the companion to Luke. Samwise is the companion in Lord of the Rings. The comic pair is Merry and Pippin, and you notice they're all hobbits. So that's the way that Samwise is connected to the comic pair there. In the Pirates movies, the companion is Elizabeth, who, as we've said, she's the love interest who picks up the hero's energy and actually becomes a hero herself in the last movie as the Queen of the Pirates. And the comic pair in those movies, well, there are at least two. Mulroy and Murtaugh, who are the Royal Marines that are questioning Jack when Elizabeth falls off of the big wall at Port Royal and falls into the ocean. Jack has to go in and save her because the Royal Marines can't swim. That's one comic pair. The other are Pintel and Rigetti, who are the ones who actually capture Elizabeth and take her to Barbossa. So when you're thinking about the relationship between these companions and the hero and the comic pairs, you can write them in all kinds of different ways. The main idea is that once you figured out who your hero is, The companion is the character or characters who follow the hero most loyally, helping them complete the adventure. And the companion actually has an archetypal scene of their own, which you can write on the fly. And this is called the dunking scene. And again, it's another scene with water in it. For some reason, the companion always seems to get dunked in water at some point. Like the scene we were just talking about with Elizabeth, where she falls off the wall and Jack has to save her from drowning. In Empire Strikes Back, R2 falls into the swamp at Dagobah and almost gets swallowed by a monster. And remember at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Samwise almost drowns in that lake because he's trying to join Frodo on the boat. So in each of these scenes, it's the companion's loyalty to the hero that leads to the dunking. When Elizabeth stumbles backward, it's because she doesn't want to marry Norrington. Remember the scene? She was just then, he was announcing the engagement, and she suddenly couldn't breathe. Now, of course, part of that is because her corset was too tight. But buried in that is something that we have already known, which is that she's in love with Will Turner. So it's her loyalty to him that causes the dunking scene. Now, in The Empire Strikes Back, R2 is trying to follow Luke away from the crashed X-Wing, and that leads to his dunking scene. And of course, Samwise, obviously, is refusing to let Frodo go it alone into Mordor because he swore that he would go with him. So once you recognize that you're in the companion's dunking scene, well, you've got some writing to do. And now you know how to do that writing. What's left? The villains. So we've already touched on the fact that there are multiple villains, and specifically that there are proximate villains, and there's usually one ultimate villain who represents the main evil of the story. It's the proximate villain who interacts with the hero and pals more often, and sometimes the ultimate villain is simply a force, like we talked about greed being the ultimate villain in the Pirates films, even though Cutler Beckett kind of steps in to embody that villainy in the second movie. And here I need to touch on the difference between the theme and the evil of the story, because I've been talking a lot about the main evil sometimes being an abstract force, and I mentioned earlier that the Guru will talk about the theme. So the main theme of the story, the main evil, are the two forces that are battling it out through the characters. And in the original Star Wars trilogy, you might think that these are the light and dark sides of the Force. And the dark side is certainly the main evil. But the main theme is actually family, which becomes clear when Luke learns that Darth Vader is his father and Leia is his sister. And in fact, it's the family connection that causes Darth Vader to betray the ultimate villain at the end of the sixth movie, but the third movie. And this family relationship in Star Wars gets played up big time in the prequel and sequel trilogies, as you probably know. In Lord of the Rings, the main evil is the allure of power that's represented by the ring. And the main theme is hope in the face of adversity, which is what Gandalf and Samwise are always pushing as an antidote to despair. So back to Davy Jones as a villain, because he's a pretty complex villain. I believe that Davy Jones as a villain represents more of an inversion of the story's main theme than a representative of the main evil, because he's not really a greedy character. But in the original Pirates trilogy, the main evil is greed, but the main theme is love and duty, which is the thing that ties together Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann. And it's also something that Will Turner feels toward his father, who he is sworn to free from the curse that he's under Davy Jones. And Davy Jones inverts this. He betrayed love and duty by cutting out his own heart when his love betrayed him, or when he felt that she had. And this inversion of the main theme is eventually the very thing that Cutler Beckett, who is the embodiment of greed, uses to enslave Davy Jones. So you can see how this makes Davy Jones into a very complex villain. He's not a villain because he's greedy, but he is a villain because his betrayal of the story's main theme made him vulnerable to being enslaved by the main villain. Now, in the original Star Wars trilogy, the Emperor is a sort of embodiment of the ultimate villain. I mean, the ultimate villain, you could say, is the dark side, and Darth Vader is the proximate villain. In Lord of the Rings, Sauron and his ring, of course, the ultimate villain, with various characters carrying the proximate villain energy through that corrupting influence. We've talked about Boromir, but also Gollum and Saruman and even Denethor. Because the ultimate villain is usually or often very abstract, representing some aspect of evil. It's the proximate villain who usually steals the show. I mean, you know how popular Darth Vader is, and this makes them far more fun to write. Now, what this means for writing on the fly is that you'll find yourself having fun writing the bad guy. And when you're doing this, when you're like, oh, this guy's really fun to write because he's so bad, consider giving that guy a boss who represents a more abstract form of evil. Maybe like Davy Jones, they're serving involuntarily, or maybe like Darth Vader, they volunteered to serve this greater evil, and it can really add depth to your story, even while keeping that fun bad guy who's so fun to write. And there are some neat archetypal scenes that play out between the two villains. As we've talked about, Darth Vader betrayed the Emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi, and that's something that happens a lot. Davy Jones, at the end of the third Pirates movie, he rebels against Cutler Beckett, and he kills Beckett's right-hand man Mercer by shoving his tentacles in his face. You might remember that scene. It's kind of gross. And remember, in the end of The Lord of the Rings, it's not Frodo, it's Gollum who actually carries the ring down into Mount Doom, another pit, just like the one that Darth Vader body slammed the Emperor into. So you might not want to do it any of these ways. You might want your hero and pals to get rid of the sub-boss and the boss, to be a big victory for them. But knowing that there are all these other possibilities of the relationship between two villains can really give you a lot to think about and inspire you as you are writing on the fly. Now, my last point about character archetypes, which I've kind of touched on already, is that they don't have to be one archetype per character. Don't feel confined by that if you have a fun character who seems to overlap two archetypes, or you have two characters who both carry kind of the same energy. You can have multiple villains expressing different aspects of badness, like we were just talking about in Lord of the Rings, or you can smash your rough and your guru together and have this guy debate himself during the philosophical banter scene. That would be fun. I don't think I've ever seen that, actually. That would be pretty fun. Instead of being one character, an archetype could be a bunch of characters or a group of characters. Like imagine a story where the guru is three wise old rocks, or your rough character is a pair of werewolf twins. There's just so much you can do, and it's up to you to have fun finding different ways to express this archetypal energy. You can have two roughs and two gurus competing with each other. As we mentioned before, Boromir was a rough character, but so was Aragorn, and they had different aspects of it, one negative, one positive. Boromir was the corrupted rough, and Aragorn was the virtuous rough. You can split archetypes like this, mix them together. As we were talking about, Barbossa being both villain and guru, and he does the dying and coming back. And in that central movie, what happened? There was no Barbossa. Who was the guru? Tia Dalma stepped in to take up some of that sort of guru, kind of villainous guru energy that Barbossa dropped by dying at the end of the first movie. See, there's all so much fun stuff that you can do having characters blend and mix and splitting up this energy. So watch for these patterns in the movies that you like, in the television shows that you like, and in the novels that you like, and read more novels. But most of all, once you start noticing these patterns, and you can start seeing in the things that you like, then you can write better that way, and you can feel more comfortable writing on the fly. Thank you.